this thing.
Let's go.
Live TV, where nothing is scripted and every second could be your last. These are some of
All
the
right, I already know what
darkest
happened there.
moments in television history.
What the woke?
It's 1987 in NBC's Burbank studio, a place where popular shows like The Tonight Show and Wheel of Fortune were filmed, along with live news broadcasts. Though even in a busy studio like this, security wasn't as tight as you might expect. Visitors could come and go more easily, and on this particular day, one visitor would change everything. Gary Stolman entered NBC's studio not as an intruder, but as the guest of his father who worked there. No one batted an eye as he passed through the halls, as this wasn't unusual, as employees often brought friends and family to see how live broadcasts were made. Stolman, though, had no interest in just watching. As the countdown to air began, the studio staff went through their usual routine. Cameras were in place, microphones were checked, and producers watched from the control room, making sure everything was ready for another smooth broadcast. But lurking just out of frame was Gary Stolman, waiting for the right moment to strike. In the middle of the broadcast, Stolman made his move. He walked directly onto set, startling the presenting news anchor, David Horowitz, and the rest of the crew. Stolman, holding what looked like a gun, demanded David's attention and gave him a note to read.
What is this? Let me see what it says. All right.
He's got a gun to his back.
All right, well, let me read this. Folks, we have someone on the set who's standing here and would like me to read this copy which was just handed to me. You want to tell me your name or not? What is it?
Gary.
And Gary, where are you from?
At this point, the broadcast cut. Though still in the moment and completely unaware that they were off the air, David had a split decision to make. Resist and risk violence, or read to keep everyone safe. So without hesitation, David began to read. The message was strange and filled with paranoid delusions. Gary claimed that the government had replaced his father with an alien clone, and he was convinced that they were trying to silence him. And even though the statement made very little sense, David read every word seriously to satisfy the man threatening his life. Though again, Gary didn't know that absolutely none of it would make it live on air. Though in a segment NBC did about the situation merely hours after, they revealed the last part of David reading Gary's letter.
There is no way I can harm anyone with this empty BB gun.
The police arrived shortly after and arrested Gary Stolman without any violence.
So he did all that just to tell the world that his dad is an alien. Hey,
Tommy Cooper wasn't your typical comedian. Instead of telling jokes with punchlines, he used
And he just gave up the gun that
tricks.
easy.
But the twist was that Tommy's tricks almost always went wrong, and they went wrong on purpose. He would bumble his way through a routine, fumbling cards or dropping props, and the audience would roar with laughter. And that's what makes this moment captured on live television all the more disturbing.
Yo, is there
Even though he played
magicians
the
that do
fool on
this
stage,
nowadays?
Tommy suffered from
I find it's just like they just moved to TikTok or YouTube. Like there's no like
intense
TV
stage
specials
fright.
for
he would feel anxious
magicians.
every time before stepping before an audience, as deep down he was terrified of failing his fans. And to cope with that fear, Tommy turned to alcohol. His drinking became a way to manage the
I wanna
stress
become a
and
streamer
calm his
musician.
nerves. Over time, it became more than just a way to handle stage fright.
wanna do
It
a
became
tightrope
an
walk
addiction that
across
completely
the
controlled his life.
World
Even
Trade
as his
Center.
career soared, he would often show up late to shows and rush through them due to being so drunk by the time the cameras began to roll. Then, April 15th, 1984, Tommy was set to perform as part of a live broadcast called Live from Her Majesty's,
When
a
you
popular
just fall.
variety show airing on British television. It was a night like any other, or so it
And
seemed.
then a fighter
Little
jet
did the
saves
audience
me.
know that they were about to witness a moment that would be remembered forever. It's a Sunday evening, and over 12 million people are tuned in from the comfort of their homes, excited to see Tommy Cooper. When Tommy stepped onto the stage that night, everything seemed perfectly normal. The audience cheered at the sight of him, and he seemed ready to deliver another hilarious performance. Though just as he was getting ready to perform his first trick, it happened. Right in the middle of his
Did he
act,
break his
Tommy
legs?
suddenly collapsed, falling
Oh.
backwards into the curtain behind him. The crowd obviously erupted in laughter, as to them, this was just another part of his act. A man who had literally built his career on messing up tricks had fallen over on stage. Though what
You think
no
they were
one in
laughing
the
when he got, like,
audience
stretchered
realized
off?
was that something was terribly wrong.
Oh,
For a
they
full
didn't.
12 minutes, the audience, the TV viewers, and even some of the crew backstage thought Tommy's collapse was part of the show, but this time there was no punchline.
For 12
Tommy
minutes?
Cooper wasn't improvising or acting. He was having a massive heart attack live on stage in front of millions. His signature fez slipped off his head as he lay motionless. But the laughter continued because no one could believe that the great Tommy Cooper, the man who made his living from staged clumsiness, was actually dying before their eyes. The crew and
So like what minute do you start this panic just come in? I feel like by the third minute you're like, damn, this is going too long.
performers backstage eventually realized that something wasn't right. As the broadcast continued, stagehands quickly dragged Tommy behind the curtain, thinking they could fix the situation without alarming the audience. They didn't want to stop the show or break the illusion of live television, so they carried on with the next act as if nothing happened. Medics were called immediately and CPR was performed, but it was already too late. Tommy Cooper had suffered a fatal heart attack. Despite the efforts to save him, there was nothing they could do. Tommy Cooper had passed away just feet from where the audience was still laughing at him, unaware of the tragedy that had just occurred.
His body was found this week.
Yeah, I feel like that's how he wanted to go out.
The life-changing phone call early Saturday morning. Sharon Badgett says she was stunned by the news. Throughout the time he'd been missing, she still kept hope he'd be found alive.
Alison Parker and Adam Ward were journalists working for WDBJ7, a local news station in Virginia. On the morning of the 26th of August 2015, they were assigned to cover a story like any other day, though it would soon turn into one that no viewer would ever be able to forget. Alison was a 24-year-old reporter who grew up knowing she wanted to be a journalist, a career that allowed her to meet people and tell their stories. After graduating from James Madison University, she quickly found her place at WBJ7, where she was known for her professionalism and work ethic. Adam Ward, who was 27, was an experienced cameraman who often worked together with Alison. The morning of August 26th, 2015 started like any other day for Alison and Adam. They were assigned to cover a local story about tourism at Bridgewater Plaza, a small shopping and recreation center in Monetta, Virginia. It was a peaceful, everyday assignment, one that both Alison and Adam had done many times before. That morning, Alison was scheduled to interview Vicky Gardner, the executive director of a small chamber of commerce, to discuss how tourism was affecting the community. As usual, Adam set up the camera, checking the angles, and making sure everything was ready for the live broadcast. Alison prepared her questions for the interview with Vicky, who was also getting ready to speak on camera. The interview began without any issues, but then, in the middle of the live broadcast, a figure appeared in the background, one that neither Alison nor Vicky took any notice of at first. The figure then moved closer towards the camera, and suddenly, several shots were fired. Viewers watching the live broadcast heard the sound before they could fully process what was happening. The camera, still rolling, captured the chaos as the camera tilted and fell. Alison and Vicky screamed and ran for cover, while Adam, still holding the camera, was caught in the crossfire. For viewers at home, the scene was confusing and terrifying. No one could have imagined that they were witnessing a real, live murder unfold on their screens. Colleagues back at the station were just as shocked, as the anchors who were monitoring the live feed were stunned as the screen suddenly cut back to the studio. Colleagues at the station tried to reach out to Alison and Adam, but there was no response. Within minutes, emergency services were called, and the plaza was soon flooded with police and medical personnel, but it was already too late. Alison and Adam had lost their lives, whilst Vicky had suffered a wound, but was able to at least physically recover in hospital after a surgery. The station's anchors, still shaken, had to continue the broadcast, not yet realizing the full scope of the tragedy that had just occurred. After the shooting, the gunman, still at large, uploaded his own footage of the attack onto Facebook. He eventually
Wait, what? Wait.
The gunman, still at large, uploaded his own footage of
Alison made racist comments. EEOC report file. They hired her after that. Adam went to HR on me after working with me one time. I filmed the shooting. See Facebook.
of the attack onto Facebook. He eventually was found out to be Vesta Lee Flanagan II, a former employee of WDBJ7, the same station where Allison and Adam worked. Flanagan
Oh wait, this dude?
of WDBJ7, the same station where Allison
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was about to say when we first saw him, he just doesn't look real. He looks like AI generated.
and Adam worked. Flanagan, who went by the on-air name Bryce Williams, had been a reporter at the station several years before the attack. Flanagan's relationship with the station was rocky from the beginning. He was known to clash with his colleagues and supervisors, often accusing them of discrimination and unfair treatment. His behavior at work became increasingly erratic, and it led to a series of complaints from co-workers. He accused some of them, including Allison and Adam, of making racist remarks. Flanagan was also seemingly obsessed with other tragic events, like the attack on Charleston Church committed just 2 months earlier. After the police had tracked him down, it eventually led to a very short, high-speed car chase. And after being ran off the road, being surrounded by the police, Flanagan decided to end his own time on Earth. In his car, they found a wig, several disguises, and 3 license plates. The station that day was forced to balance mourning the loss of 2 team members while continuing to provide news coverage to their audience, including coverage of the event itself.
Wearing black trunks, weighing 144, the challenger, Amo Griffith.
It's the early 1960s, a time
Damn.
when boxing was one of the most popular sports in America. 2 names stood out in the world of welterweight boxing, Emil Griffith and Benny Kid Paret. Both fighters were skilled, ambitious, and determined to be the best, and the 2 had faced each other twice before, with Griffith winning the first match and Paret winning the second, capturing the welterweight title. As their rivalry was heating up, the boxing world was eager for their third and final showdown, what everyone expected to be the fight of the year. In the weeks leading up to the match, tension between the 2 fighters had begun to escalate. During the weigh-in before the fight, Paret had reportedly called Griffith a homophobic slur in front of the press, knowing it would strike a nerve. You see, at the time, being openly gay or bisexual was not accepted in mainstream society, especially if you were competing for the championship of such a masculine sport. Griffith, who was in fact bisexual, knew it could be career-ruining if his secret came out, so he likely took the remark very personally, and it could have turned the fight into something more than just the championship match. With the stage set, fans packed into Madison Square Garden on March 24th, 1962, to witness the third and final battle between these 2 rivals. A fight that people would remember for all the wrong reasons. From the very first punch, it was clear that this wasn't just another fight. In the earlier rounds, Paret had been able to hold his own, as he was no stranger to taking hits. But this time, something was slightly off, and as the rounds went on, the fight turned into a brutal back and forth, both men trading punches in the center of the ring. But by the 12th round, the fight had taken a toll on both men. But for Benny Paret, things were getting worse. After enduring round after round of punishment, he was visibly exhausted. His legs were shaky, and his arms were slow to come up in defense. Then it happened. In the corner of the ring, Griffith saw his opening. Paret was pinned against the ropes, unable to escape. Griffith unleashed a barrage of punches, one after the other, with no sign of stopping. Left hook, right hook, uppercut. Each punch landed cleanly, and Paret had no answer. His hands dropped, his body went limp, but Griffith kept going. The referee hesitated for just too long. In that moment, Griffith continued to
he fired the fuck out of him.
Unprotected face and head.
You're not into boxing. I mean,
29 unanswered punches in a matter of seconds.
No.
Finally, the referee stepped in and pulled Griffith off of him, but the fight was over. Paret slumped to the canvas, unconscious.
I only watched him like a really big fight
that night as a victor. To him and to everyone around him, it was just another fight, a brutal one, but just another fight. I
think the last one I watched was a Tyson Fury match.
Unconscious and unresponsive. Griffith watched as his rival was taken away, perhaps knowing that he went too far, but not how bad it truly was. As Paret arrived in hospital, the doctors quickly realized the extent of his injuries. He had suffered severe brain trauma from the fight. A week had passed, and he had still not regained consciousness from being knocked out in the ring, and remained in a coma. Griffith would try for hours to visit Perret after learning of his condition, but was barred entry. Then on the 10th day after the fight, Benny Kid Perret would pass away due to the damage done to his brain. Griffith would then become the target of Benny's fans, who were absolutely convinced that he had killed the man on purpose. Benny Perret's death was not the first time a boxer had died from his injuries sustained in the ring, but it was one of the most public and devastating examples. The brutal nature of the fight, the intensity of Griffith's punches, and the failure of the referee made it not only tragic, but extremely controversial. The referee of the fight, Ruby Goldstein, would never find work again after the incident, and Griffith himself, now carrying the heavy burden of Perret's death, would continue his boxing career, but it was clear that things would never be the same. Though he went on to fight many more matches, he seemed to be different. Out of his
he should have
next
gone undefeated.
23 matches, he would only win 9 of them, setting his final record at 85 wins to 24 losses. Emil Griffith said himself that he could never quite punch someone with the same strength again out of the sheer fear of claiming another life accidentally.
At the factory reset my PC again.
On the still icy pitch, substitute Gary Hare was lurking, and it looked every inch a replay.
It was the 11th of May, 1985, a sunny, exciting Saturday afternoon in Bradford, England. Thousands of fans had gathered at the Valley Parade Stadium to watch their beloved Bradford City football team play Lincoln City. The atmosphere was electric, as Bradford City had already secured the 3rd Division Championship, and this match was supposed to be a celebration, a joyful conclusion to a successful season. Fans packed the stands, eager to cheer on their team one last time before the summer break. But hidden beneath the surface of this celebration, there was a disaster waiting to happen. The main stand at Valley Parade was a massive structure built almost entirely of wood. It had been standing since 1908, and over the years it had seen countless football matches. But in those decades, something else had also built up under the stands. Piles of rubbish. Old newspapers,
can we get another basketball
food
stream?
Wrappers, and other trash had
I want to do my next one with James.
Stands. The structure itself was outdated and unsafe, but no one seemed too concerned. After all, it had stood for nearly 80 years without issue. What fans didn't know was that the stand was scheduled for demolition just 2 days later, as workers were supposed to come in and tear it down because of the safety
this week can be
concerns.
low
The club had been
70s.
warned several times about the
The
safety
lowest
risks
you're gonna
it
get
posed,
is 62
as
degrees.
inspectors had pointed out the dangers of the paper and rubbish collecting underneath the stand, but at the moment, during the match, no one was thinking about any of that. People were focused on the game, on celebrating, and on the bright future ahead of their team. Around the 40th minute of the match, though, things began to take a dark turn. A small wisp of smoke appeared from underneath the wooden seating area. At first, most people didn't notice. It seemed too minor to worry about. Maybe someone had lit a
I remember
cigarette,
we
but
watched
what
this. I
started
think was it
as a
Nick
tiny
Crowley?
flicker of smoke quickly grew
He
into
covered
something
this, I think.
much more dangerous.
Well, we've actually got a fire in the stand on the far side of the ground. And that looks very nasty indeed. Now the police have gone over there to try and quell the fire, and they're frantically getting some of the supporters out. Now these are extraordinary scenes at Valley Parade. It's supposed to be a day of celebration.
Good
Well, hopes
lord.
the stand doesn't burn down.
One single lit cigarette.
You know what this
was
reminded me of? I don't know why it
accidentally
reminded me
dropped
of
through
a
gap
Final
in the wooden
Destination scene.
seating. It slipped into the piles of rubbish that had been
Remember when
accumulating under
in the one
stands
opening
for
where
years.
it's the
The
F1
paper
race
litter
and the
acted as
car
fuel,
crashed and everything just went
catching
to shit?
fire almost instantly. What could have been a harmless accident on any
I don't
other
know why it
day
reminds me of
became
that.
the spark for an unimaginable tragedy. But many still didn't realize the seriousness of the situation. It was happening so fast that there was little time to react. Within just a few
Yo, look at this
the
dickhead.
situation. It was happening so fast that there was little time to react. Within just a few minutes, what had been a fun, exciting afternoon turned into a scene of chaos. The fire, fueled by all the rubbish and paper, spread rapidly, with the wind helping to carry the flames higher and further across the structure, making it impossible for people to stop it. In the commentary booth,
Oh,
the
yeah.
broadcasters struggled to process what they were witnessing. At first, they tried to remain calm and composed, offering updates on the situation. But as
lord.
the fire grew larger and more intense, the commentators' voices conveyed a growing sense of horror and disbelief as the scale of the tragedy became apparent.
The heat is now becoming tremendous. I'm sitting immediately opposite the main stand, and I can feel the heat. It's almost beginning to burn me over here, quite honestly.
Yo, if you're the commentator, can't like, yo, like I would run, bro. That shit looks like it can spread all the way over there.
The whole
Like they're
stand
making him
is
commentate
rolling
this.
in the space of a few minutes. Quite extraordinary scenes at Valley Parade. This was supposed to be a day of utter joy, triumph and celebration. It's turning it into a nightmare.
In total, the fire consumed the lives of 56 spectators
God
and left
damn.
many more lives completely destroyed. In the aftermath, many of the deceased were found pinned to their chairs by debris that had fallen on them, making escape impossible.
He's got the mask almost off. Here it comes. It's Owen Hart. The Blazer.
Ah, damn. Yo, rip Owen.
There you go, King.
Owen Hart was living the life that most wrestlers could only
You
dream.
would've loved Bryan
Born into
Danielson.
The Hart family, he had wrestling in his blood. His father, Stu Hart, was a wrestling icon, and his brother, Bret the Hitman Hart, was one of the most famous wrestlers in the world at the time. But Owen wasn't just a skilled wrestler. He had charm, humor, and a connection with the audience that made him stand out. Owen's wrestling career took off in the 1990s. He was known for his technical skill, his high-flying moves, and his ability to entertain the crowd. Whether he was a hero or a villain, fans couldn't help but cheer for him. And he made people laugh, especially with his character, the Blue Blazer, a goofy superhero that Owen played to perfection. But by the time the 1999 pay-per-view event Over the Edge was about to begin, Owen's character was going through some changes. The WWE, which was called the WWF back then, had scripted a big entrance for Owen that night. As the Blue Blazer, he was supposed to descend from the rafters of the Kemper Arena like a superhero flying in to save the day.
Yeah, I feel like everyone knows this. Oh. Fucking jerk off.
It's 1987 in NBC's Burbank studio. Crowd, Blazer, supposed to descend from the rafters of the Kemper Arena like a superhero flying in to save the day. And the general idea was simple. Owen would be lowered into the ring from above, attached to a special harness. And once he'd been lowered close enough to the ground, the harness would be released, making Owen fall flat on his face. It was meant to be a funny, dramatic entrance to make the fans laugh. And it wasn't the first time that Owen had done a stunt like this. But this time, things were slightly different, as there was a lot more at stake, as this was a live pay-per-view event, with millions of fans watching from home. Behind the scenes, preparations were being made for Owen's big
Wait,
entrance.
Dark Side of the Ring
stunt
footage.
had to be timed perfectly, and the equipment needed to work just right. But even the smallest error could turn a harmless stunt into a disaster. The harness that they were using for the stunt was designed for a quick release, meant to let him detach easily when he reached the ground. But this quick release feature had a serious flaw. It required very little force to disengage, or meant if something went wrong, or if it was just knocked the wrong way, it could release too early.
Jesus.
As Owen stood high above the ring, harnessed in, everything seemed ready. But in just a few moments, the atmosphere inside the arena and in homes around the world would change nearly instantly. At exactly 7:38 p.m, it happened. Owen was released from the harness too early. The crowd didn't realize it, but Owen was already dead. He had fell from a height of 78 feet. At first, many of the fans
damn.
believed it was just part of the show, as they thought for a brief second that it was just another scripted event. But as the paramedics rushed into the ring, the reality of the situation
Would you be
started
cool
to
you're deaf
sink
on
in.
pay-per-view?
Commentators
A
Jim
no?
Ross and Jerry Lawler, who was sitting ringside, quickly realized the seriousness.
Bro, because you got, like, bro, imagine you die and they just continue the pay-per-view. They're like, oh, like, oh, shit, he just died. Oh, well, send fucking Dingleberry and
of
Jack
the
out there and
situation.
wrestle.
They were stunned. In the midst of the live broadcast, they struggled to find the words. As Owen Hart's lifeless body was rushed to the hospital, the show at Kemper Arena continued. But behind the scenes, chaos and confusion reigned.
Yo, they said his
WWE
blood was on the
officials
mat
struggled to
for the rest of the
manage
show.
fallout of what had just happened. The show's producers were faced with an impossible decision. How do you move forward after a tragedy like this? Do you stop the event, or do you continue hoping to keep the audience calm and prevent mass panic? Vince McMahon, the head of the WWE, made the controversial call to continue the event. For fans in the arena, there was little information given about what just occurred. Immediately after the accident, an investigation began. The police and regulatory agencies were brought in to examine the scene, interview witnesses, and look at the equipment that had been used in the stunt. Early reports focused on the harness, as it wasn't designed for
like
the
he's
kind
gonna
of stunt
burn in
that
hell.
Owen was performing.
Vince,
Safety precautions that could have prevented the accident were not in place. The investigation revealed that the harness required only a slight tug for it to disengage, meaning that Owen's slight movement or even a small bump could have triggered it. Owen's wife, Martha Hart, was devastated. Not only had she lost her husband in such a public and horrifying way, but she was also left with questions about why the WWE had allowed such a dangerous stunt to happen. Martha soon took legal action, filing a wrongful death lawsuit. She argued that the company had been negligent in ensuring Owen's safety. Martha's lawsuit eventually resulted in a settlement, but the damage had already been done. In the years following his death, Martha Hart established the Owen Hart Foundation. It's a charity dedicated to helping individuals in need with scholarships, housing, and other forms of support. Owen was by all measures a legend in the WWE and is well deserving of being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. However, his wife, very justifiably, has barred him from being entered into the hall, as she feels it's wrong for the same organization that neglected his safety use him for profit even after death.
She's so fire. Finish the XM4 and AK.
The Station nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island, was a small local venue, but on the night of February 20th, 2003, it was packed. People were excited to see Great White, a popular rock band from the 1980s. Over 460 people crowded into the club, ready for a night of loud music and fun.
What are we doing and play COD all day?
The nightclub was only supposed to hold 404 people. That night it was over capacity, as too many people squeezed into too small of a space. People were standing shoulder to shoulder with barely any room to move, and everyone focused on the band, unaware of the hidden dangers around them. As the band got ready to play, Great White decided to add a special effect to their show: pyrotechnics, small fireworks that were set to go off on stage. These kinds of effects are exciting to watch, but can also be very dangerous, especially
in that tight-ass
indoors.
room.
The owner of the station had lined the walls and ceilings with foam to make the club soundproof. Unfortunately, the foam was also highly flammable, and even though there were safety regulations in place, they weren't followed. At around 11:07 p.m, the lights dimmed, the music started, and Great White took the stage. The crowd cheered as the fireworks burst into the air, lighting up the small stage. But within seconds, the mood shifted. What most people didn't realize was that the sparks from the fireworks had hit the foam on the ceiling and walls. At first, no one seemed concerned, as most thought it was just part of the show, but the fire spread faster than anyone could ever imagine. The flames grew quickly, and soon the entire back of the stage was on fire. Thick black smoke started to fill the room, making it hard to see or breathe. Panic set in. People began to rush and shove, desperate to escape the growing inferno. But there was another bigger problem. The nightclub didn't have enough clear, easy exits. Some of the doors were blocked or hard to find, and most of the crowd just rushed to the front door, which was the same way they came in. With so many people trying to escape all at once, the entrance became jammed. People were trapped, and the fire was spreading even faster. It took less than 90 seconds for the flames to completely take over the club. As the fire blazed, it was already too late for many inside. The flames had grown so quickly that even with firefighters arriving on the scene within minutes, there was little they could do. The fire had burned so intensely that parts of the building had collapsed before the emergency teams could fully intervene. Initially, the local news station was simply there to cover the event as part of their community spotlight, but in the end, they recorded the deaths of 100 people that night.
As the news spreads, air traffic over Sydney is diverted. There are evacuations. The Sydney Opera House, the U.S. Consulate, which issues an emergency warning to Americans.
The morning of December 15th, 2014 started as just another Monday in the city of Sydney. The Lint Cafe in Martin Place welcomed customers, offering a break from the busy streets outside. This peaceful setting would become the center of a national crisis. Located near the center of the city, the cafe was perfectly positioned right across the street from the 7 News television studios, where they would soon broadcast the cafe to millions of eyes across the country. But everything changed when a man dressed in a long black robe walked into the cafe. His name was Man Haron Monis, a self-proclaimed sheik with a very troubled history. Monis had been in the news before. He was known for his radical views and run-ins with the law. For instance, to protest against Australian troops being deployed in Afghanistan, Monis would write letters to the families of fallen soldiers, which would essentially make fun of them and insult them. But on that day, he had more than just controversy on his mind. He carried a shotgun, and in a few
you literally know it's Sheik the Iron Sheik. So just cause I know the Iron Sheik, yo, you do realize I didn't watch him, right? I just know his name.
Of the cafe and the people inside. Then Monis revealed his plan. This was not just a hostage situation, it was something far more terrifying.
But you know what a sheik is? No, I don't.
Were now prisoners, and Monis made it clear that no one would leave unless his demands were met. But the question of what he actually wanted hung in the air as Monis forced the hostages to display a black flag with Arabic writing in the cafe window.
Yo, if I didn't know Georgia was a country, what makes you think I'm gonna know what a sheik is?
From the outside, onlookers had no idea what was happening inside, but soon the entire country would find out. As soon as the first news of the hostage situation broke, television networks scrambled to capture every detail, with cameras from the 7 news studios.
But you can name the entire AEW roster.
As viewers at home,
because I'm watching it right now.
To the terrifying events as they unfolded in real time. For the first time, Australia was experiencing a hostage crisis broadcast live across the country. Inside the cafe, Monis knew exactly how to use the media to his advantage. He wasn't just looking for attention, he demanded that his message be heard, not just by those in the cafe, but by the entire world. Soon after the siege began, Monis made his demands clear. First, he forced some of the hostages to call the media using a phone in the cafe and tell them to broadcast his words.
You realize how he just ignored that?
Australia by the Islamic State. He demanded that the news stations delivered this message to the public immediately, hoping to create fear and panic. But that wasn't all. Monis also requested something even more symbolic, a flag. He demanded that an Islamic State flag be delivered to him at the cafe, as Monis wanted to show the world
you knew that,
he
right?
was acting on behalf of ISIS. Even though the group itself had no direct connection to him, as it seemed like his goal was clear, to be seen not just as an isolated attacker, but as part of something much larger and menacing. If the media broadcasted his message and the flag was delivered, Monis believed he would have more power to influence the whole city. But even with the cameras rolling, the authorities did not give in. The police and media hesitated to fulfill Monis's demands. Right? Broadcasting such a statement could cause widespread panic, and delivering the flag would only give him more power. Though officials knew the situation was fragile.
We ask you, where is your family from? I don't know. We're I don't know. They don't know, bro. We're Americans. Like, and you know that where your grandfather's from.
Any misstep could provoke Monis and lead to a devastating outcome. But while they deliberated on how to handle Monis's request, the world watched. Every passing hour felt like a lifetime, and the tension only grew. But the demands did not stop.
Yo, never mind, bro.
Monis also claimed that 4 devices had been planted around Sydney, ready to go off if his orders were not met. This declaration sent a wave of panic throughout the city as the police raced to search for these
Arab in jail,
bombs.
isn't that? No.
The media continued its wall-to-wall coverage, showing the live footage of the cafe, while reporters speculated on what might happen next. The New South Wales Police Commissioner, Andrew Scipione, took charge of the search for these supposed devices. The police force was stretched thin as it is, having to both monitor the hostage crisis unfolding at the cafe and scour the city for these bombs, though their top priority was preventing a city-wide catastrophe. No corner of Sydney could be left unchecked, and the clock was ticking. But where would these devices actually be? Monis hadn't given the authorities any details, and he provided no specific locations for the devices, just the chilling fact that they were out there somewhere. The vagueness of the threat made things even worse. High-profile locations such as government buildings, train stations, and tourist areas like the Sydney Opera House were all potential targets. These places were filled with people, all unaware of the potential danger they were in. People across the city held their breath, wondering if Monis's threats about the bombs were real. Streets were cleared, businesses were closed, and police forces were on high alert. But as hours passed, nothing was found. Outside the cafe, the cameras continued to roll. What made this situation so unique and so frightening was the fact that Monis knew that it was happening live in front of everyone. In real time, millions of people, even beyond Australia, were following every development. As the day dragged on, the situation became more unpredictable. The live coverage only heightened the tension, as viewers at home could sense that something was about to happen. The standoff between Monis and the authorities was entering dangerous territory, and both sides were running out of time. Though what no one knew is that the final act of this crisis was about to unfold, and it would not be a peaceful resolution. After hours of searching, the New South Wales police reported back that not a single device had been discovered. The police combed through every high-risk area, checked suspicious packages, and worked around the clock to make sure the city was safe. Yet despite Monis's claims, there were no signs of any explosives anywhere in Sydney. So what was Monis really up to? For the authorities, this was a critical turning point, as they had to reassess the situation. If there were no bombs, then Monis's threats were likely a bluff, and he had used fear to keep everyone, the hostages, the police and the city, under his command for hours. Though now that his bluff had been exposed, the question was, what would Monis do next?
He never told me any of this.
A handful of hostages saw a brief opportunity to flee. In the confusion of the early moments of the standoff, when Monis was distracted, several of them made a run for it, sprinting out the doors and into the safety of the surrounding police cordon. Their escape was a ray of hope for those still inside, but it also made the situation more dangerous for the hostages who remained. Monis became more tense and angry as he realized his grip on the situation was slipping. He tightened his control, knowing that every escaped hostage weakened his position. The escapees were immediately taken into police custody, questioned for any information that could help them resolving the crisis, but for the hostages who stayed behind, the fear of the unknown was the worst part. Monis had made it clear that he was willing to take extreme measures to achieve his goal, and the hostages had no idea what would happen next. Would he turn violent? Would the police storm the cafe? As the hours ticked by, their exhaustion grew. But then, just after 2 a.m., 17 hours after Monis had first entered the building, everything changed. Monis had forced one of the hostages, cafe manager Tori Johnson, to kneel on the ground. In that horrifying moment, Monis pulled the trigger, ending Tori's life. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the cafe, and the police outside knew they had no choice. They had to act. The raid began almost instantly. Heavily armed tactical police
they got 40 guns and they waited
doors in a desperate bid to end the siege. The hostages, terrified and exhausted, dove for cover as gunfire erupted between the police and Monis. The raid was swift and intense, and in a span of just a few minutes, the cafe was filled with smoke and chaos. Hostages scrambled to the floor, trying to protect themselves from the crossfire. Monis fired back at the police, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. In the confusion, he was shot and killed, bringing the siege to a violent end. But the tragedy wasn't yet over. In the aftermath of the raid, it became clear that another hostage, Katrina Dawson, had also lost her life. She was fatally wounded by shrapnel during the exchange of gunfire between the police and Monis. Katrina Dawson's death, as well as Tori Johnson's, were two devastating blows to the already horrific situation.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Lauren Giddings had just graduated from law school and was about to begin the next
chapter.
Who
made a video on this? Was it Nexpo or Nick Crowley?
Was cut tragically short. Lauren lived in Macon, Georgia, near Mercer University, where she had spent those last few years studying hard to become a lawyer. She was known by her friends and family as smart, caring, and determined. Someone who always put in the effort to achieve her goals. And everything seemed to be going well for her. But on the 25th of June 2011, something strange happened. Lauren suddenly stopped answering her.
It was a JCS, I think. I think it was JCS, unless I'm wrong.
And text her, but there was no response. At first they thought she might just be busy, or just taking some time for herself. But as the hours turned into days, their worry grew. Lauren's family, far away in Maryland, began calling her friends and neighbors, hoping someone knew where she was. And her friends stopped by her apartment, hoping to find her, but there was no sign of Lauren. The door was locked, and no one had even seen her leave. Friends noted that Lauren's apartment was unusually clean, almost too clean. Everything was left as if she had just stepped outside for just a minute. Her keys, her purse, and even her cell phone were all inside, but there was still no sign of Lauren. And this was completely out of character for her. Lauren was always responsible, always in touch with her loved ones. And the fact that she had disappeared without a trace made her friends and family worry that something terrible had happened. The local community quickly rallied to search for her, but each day that passed without any news made it feel more and more hopeless. Soon, Lauren's disappearance caught the attention of local news stations and even people across the country. Flyers with her picture were posted everywhere, and everyone was asking the same question: where was Lauren? The police started to begin their investigation, searching her apartment and interviewing anyone who might have seen or heard from her. They looked for clues in her personal life, like if there was anyone she had argued with, or if she had just left on purpose. But nothing added up. As the search for Lauren intensified, more and more people from her apartment complex spoke out, hoping to provide helpful information. Among them was one of her neighbors, a man named Stephen McDaniel. At first, he seemed like just another concerned friend. Stephen lived just a few doors down from Lauren in the same apartment complex. He was quiet, kept to himself, and seemed like any other neighbor. To those who knew him, Stephen was a bit of an oddball, being awkward and introverted. Like Lauren, he had just graduated from Mercer University, and they had taken some of the same classes, though they weren't particularly close. Dressed in a plain shirt and standing outside the apartment building, Stephen agreed to speak to WG.
Hey, I know she was in the afterlife mad as fuck. They were interviewing him.
Yeah, she and I we were both JD students. We graduated.
She was like, "Yo, catch him."
What kind of person was she? I mean, what did you see?
I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know any enemies she might have had? Somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, I mean, we don't know where she is. I mean,
you think anyone has ever answered that question live on air? Like, that's the first time. Like, oh yeah, I think it was Steven 2 doors down.
The only thing we can think is that maybe she went out running and someone snatched her.
But something about Stephen's interview would soon make headlines for a completely different reason. As the interview progressed, the reporter had a shocking update to share.
But they just asked him. Like she just said, do you know anyone that would have a grudge against her?
During the broadcast, the reporter revealed that a torso, Lauren's torso, had been found in a trash bin right outside the apartment complex.
I mean, we just don't know where she is. I mean,
what about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of. I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body.
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like
he's dumb as shit.
That's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
As he struggled to keep it together upon hearing the news, McDaniel decided he needed to sit down, which, for anyone watching, seemed to be a very appropriate reaction upon hearing such horrible news. However, in hindsight, Stephen...
Imagine you get caught because you're on live TV fucking speechless because they found her body.
His reaction wasn't the shock of someone hearing about a friend's death for the first time. It was the fear of a man who realized his gruesome crime had just been uncovered. In the days following the interview, the police had already started to suspect that Lauren's killer was closer than anyone realized. Investigators began looking more closely at Stephen McDaniel. At just a glance, McDaniel didn't quite fit the profile of a killer.
Lord.
He wasn't violent, had no criminal record, and always kept to himself. But the police decided to search Stephen's apartment just 2 doors down from Lauren's. And what they found painted a terrifying picture of what had really been going on in Stephen's mind. Inside the small, cluttered apartment, the police discovered a collection of disturbing items. They found a master key to the apartment complex, something Stephen had stolen from the building's maintenance room, as this key allowed him all access to any apartment, including Lauren's. But that wasn't all. They also found the hacksaw which Stephen had used on Lauren's body. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into
Wait, doesn't
place.
he stay still the
Stephen,
entire
a
interview?
loner with obsessive tendencies, had been fixated on Lauren for months, watching her every move. On his computer, a recording was discovered taken just outside of Lauren's window, as McDaniel had been spying on Lauren, possibly for weeks or even months. Living so close to her, he had become fascinated with her life. And one night after Lauren had gone to bed, he used the stolen master key to enter her apartment, and Lauren never saw it coming. The police believe he strangled her in her sleep, catching her completely off guard. He then carefully disposed of her remains, scattering parts in various trash bins around the apartment complex, likely thinking that no one would ever find out. But Stephen hadn't accounted for the maintenance worker who would stumble upon Lauren's torso, and once that discovery was made, everything fell apart for him. Stephen was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of getting out on parole after serving 30 years. In 2018, Stephen's father would set up a GoFundMe called Justice for Stephen, which was essentially trying to persuade people who weren't fully familiar with the case to fund Stephen's legal fund to try and get him released on a technicality, as Stephen was apparently unlawfully confined and should therefore be reunited with his family. Not once is it mentioned.
I don't care like how many years it's been. Like, should we really let someone who like cut up a body back into society?
Why
even
Stephen
if he's on
was
parole,
separated from his family, or why he never deserves to get out of prison. And before this video ends, let me take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, Incogni. Now, literally the day, so you can try it out already. And yeah, thank you again.
Shout out Sirius. Yo, what's good, Gavin? It was some cartel shit. Sure, put him in the military. Bro, I don't think fucking Steven Jerkoff McDaniels is gonna be serving any army.